March 1961. Burbank, California. A-story conference room on the Pinnacle Pictures lot, 6 blocks east of the main gate, and 2 floors above the production office where the day's call sheets have been stacked since 7 in the morning. The room has a long walnut table, 8 chairs, a window that faces the back lot, and a wall of framed production stills that have been rotated every 3 years since the building went up in 1931. A woman is standing near the door with a cardboard box in her hands that was under her desk an hour ago. She has had a desk in this building for 34 years. She has had the box for 9 minutes. The man at the head of the table has just told her she is finished. Here is the story. Dorothy Havers came to the Pinnacle lot in the spring of 1927 as a script typist at the age of 19, which was the available entry point for women who intended to make themselves indispensable and understood that indispensability required a specific strategy in an industry that had not yet developed a vocabulary for what she was offering. She spent 2 years at the typewriter and 3 years in the production office, and by 1932 had moved into script supervision, which in those years was not a formal designation so much as a function that needed performing, and that Dorothy performed with the kind of institutional authority that does not require a title to be recognized. She was the person every director called before the dailies to ask the question they had forgotten to ask on set. She was the person who caught the costume continuity problem on Reel 3 before it became an editing problem on Reel 7. She was the person who remembered, without checking her notes, exactly which angle the coffee cup handle was facing in the master shot of a scene shot 6 weeks prior. She supervised continuity on 214 pictures in 34 years. She knew the shooting style of every director who had worked on that lot since the sound transition. She knew which ones shot left to right, and which ones reset their eye lines, and which ones needed to be told quietly, never loudly, when a continuity problem was developing that would cost them in post. She had saved the edit on at least a dozen pictures that the public saw polished and untroubled, and that the editor knew would not have been those things without the 3 notes in Dorothy's handwriting that arrived during the first assembly cut. She had never been publicly credited with any of this. She considered that the correct arrangement. The office she worked from was small and south-facing, smelling of script paper and the particular dry smell of continuity binders that had been opened and closed 10,000 times by hands that knew what they were looking for. Her handwriting in those binders was compressed and precise. The handwriting of a woman who had learned to put more information in less space than most people thought space could hold. She kept a pencil sharpened to a consistent point and did not use it until the point was what it needed to be, which is a small discipline that requires no commentary. Some of you have worked alongside someone like this, someone who held more of the structure together than the structure's official documents acknowledged, who knew where everything was and why it was there and what would happen if it moved, and who asked nothing from this knowledge except to be allowed to keep doing the work. Some of you have been that person. This story is for you. Leonard Greer had been head of production at Pinnacle for 18 months when he convened the story conference on the morning of March 14th. He had come from New York, from a smaller concern where his ideas about efficiency had produced 2 profitable quarters in a row, and the Pinnacle board had brought him west after the retirement of the previous production chief with a specific mandate of modernizing the studio's overhead structure. He was 46 years old and wore his hair short and his suits in the New York cut that had not yet fully arrived in Burbank, and had a way of framing every cost reduction as a forward investment in the studio's future that sounded more persuasive in a boardroom than it did in a production office. He had made 2 pictures in 18 months. Both had underperformed. The board was watching. He had a theory about the older institutional staff and their resistance to modern production methodology, and the theory did not require much pressure from the board to become a policy. Phil Cortez, Greer's production manager, opened the meeting at 9. The room held 8 people. A director named Aldous Crane, who had been making pictures at Pinnacle since 1939 and who had worked with Dorothy Havers on 11 of them. 2 producers. A casting director. 2 development executives. And in the third chair on the left side of the table, present to discuss pre-production on a 3-picture deal currently in the planning stages. A man who had driven to the lot from the San Fernando Valley that morning and parked at the East Gate and walked in without anyone meeting him because he did not require meeting. Greer arrived 7 minutes after Phil Cortez opened the meeting. He sat at the head of the table and straightened his notepad and looked at the room and said that, before they moved to the agenda, the studio had a personnel matter to address. He said that as part of the infrastructure modernization the studio had been undertaking, the production support function was being restructured, and that effective immediately, Dorothy Havers was relieved of her responsibilities. He said it in the tone of a man who has found that efficiency of delivery reduces the available surface area for argument. He said Dorothy would receive a severance package consistent with her tenure. He said the studio thanked her for her service. Dorothy was in the room because Phil Cortez had told her the story conference required her attendance for the agenda items that followed. She had carried her continuity binder for the current project in development. She had her pencil. She stood near the door and looked at the walnut table and at the men seated around it and held the binder flat against her chest with both arms for one moment before she put it on Phil Cortez's desk in the corner and went and found a cardboard box in the production office and began putting into it the personal items from the desk that had been hers for 34 years. The room held 8 people who had collectively worked with Dorothy Havers for 211 years in total. Aldous Crane had a legal pad in front of him. He looked at it. One of the producers found something requiring attention in the window that faced the backlot. Phil Cortez wrote something on his yellow pad that nobody could read. The casting director set down her coffee cup. The development executives looked at each other once and then at the table. Nobody spoke. 8 people around a walnut table who all knew what had just been said and who all knew what 34 years of that specific kind of work weighed. And the room decided collectively and without discussion that the weight belonged to someone else to lift. You know that feeling, the moment when something wrong settles into a room and 34 years of building something sits in a box near the door, and the room decides it arrived with someone else and will leave with someone else. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to know how far this story reaches. In the third chair on the left side of the table, John Wayne had not spoken since Greer came in. He had been watching. He had the quality of attention he brought to rooms that required it, which was the quality of a man who has been assessing human behavior professionally since 1930, and has developed an accuracy that does not announce itself. He had watched Greer's 7-minute arrival and the angle of the notepad and the efficiency of the delivery. He had watched Aldous Crane look at his legal pad. He had watched Dorothy come back through the door with the box. He said, "Leonard, tell me what she has done that warrants this." Greer looked at him with the particular steadiness of a man who has anticipated interruption and prepared for it. He said Dorothy had not done anything. He said the studio was moving forward with a different infrastructure model, and that this was an organizational decision and not a performance matter. He said it with the clean, flat efficiency of a man who has found that the cleaner and flatter the delivery, the shorter the available conversation. Wayne said, "She has supervised continuity on every major picture this studio has made for 34 years. The directors in this room have used her notes to save their pictures in post-production more times than they've kept count of." He did not look at Aldous Crane when he said this. He did not need to. Aldous Crane looked at his legal pad. Greer set down his pen. He said, "Mr. Wayne, I appreciate the perspective, but this is an internal production matter and not directly connected to the project you're here to discuss. I'd ask you to stay in your lane." The room went completely still in the particular way rooms go still when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. The walnut table had held a great many conversations in 30 years, and the ceiling of the storied conference room on the Pinnacle lot had absorbed a great deal of what those conversations contained, and this specific configuration of words had not previously been among them. Not addressed to this man, not in this room. Wayne looked at Leonard Greer. He held the full, settled attention of a man who has already completed the assessment of a situation and for whom no additional information is being expected or required. He looked at him for 2 full seconds. The backlot below the window made its distant, indifferent sounds. Nobody at the table moved. Then Wayne said, quietly, without raising his voice by any measurable degree, to no one specifically, and to everyone at once, I'm taking my pictures. Phil Cortez's pencil stopped on the yellow pad. Aldous Crane looked up from the legal pad for the first time since Greer had finished speaking. The producer near the window turned from the glass. 4 words set at the volume of an ordinary statement in a room that understood immediately the specific and irreversible weight of those 4 words, which was the weight of 3 pictures in pre-production. The complete forward slate Wayne had committed to the studio. The projects currently drawing from Pinnacle's production resources and representing the studio's most significant box office. Certainty for the next 2 years. Gone, in 4 words set at the volume of a man noting the weather. He stood up from the 3rd chair on the left side of the table and picked up his jacket from the back of it. He walked to the door where Dorothy Havers was standing with the cardboard box. He took the box from her hands without asking whether she wanted him to. He carried it out into the corridor, and she walked beside him, and they went down 2 flights of stairs and out through the east entrance into the March morning on the Pinnacle lot. And Wayne put the box in the back seat of his car and drove Dorothy Havers home to Reseda. He called his attorney. Before noon, the 3-picture deal was formally dissolved from the Pinnacle arrangement by the end of the week. The pictures moved to a different studio, where pre-production resumed without interruption. Wayne made certain, through his producing partner, that Dorothy Havers was offered the continuity position on all 3 pictures before anyone else was considered. She accepted. Leonard Greer lasted 22 days after the story conference. The board had been watching the 2 underperforming pictures and the overhead restructuring that had not yet produced the promised savings, and the loss of Wayne's 3-picture slate was the arithmetic the board had been waiting to perform. Greer was removed at the end of March 1961 and returned to New York and took a position at a smaller concern and did not return to the major studio world. He gave one interview to a trade publication in 1967 that touched briefly on his time at Pinnacle. He did not mention the story conference. He did not mention the 4 words. He said the Los Angeles climate had never agreed with him. Dorothy Havers worked 8 more years. She supervised 3 of Wayne's pictures under the new arrangement, and a 4th for a director she had known since 1941, who had asked for her specifically through the new studio's production office. She trained 2 young women who came through her department in those years, both of whom she took through the complete system of the binders. The notation, the compression of information into the available space, the discipline of the pencil point. One of those women, a woman named Carol Reyes from East Los Angeles, went on to supervise continuity professionally from 1966 until 1994. 28 years. She trained 3 more women in the same system, using the same notation compression she had learned from Dorothy's binders. Here is what 4 words at the volume of a weather report became. 34 years of Dorothy's career at Pinnacle, preserved by no one. Then 8 more years made possible by one morning in March. Then Carol Reyes, 28 years. Then 3 more. Building careers on a system of notation, learned from a woman who had been standing near a door with a box in her hands in Burbank. That is 34 plus 8 plus 28 plus whatever comes after Carol Reyes's 3, compounding in the direction that good work always compounds when it is allowed to continue. The chain of instruction from Dorothy to Carol to those 3 women is a direct line of professional knowledge that has been running since 1927 and is still running, built from a system developed by a woman in a south-facing office that smelled of script paper and the dry scent of binders opened and closed 10,000 times. Between the pictures that moved studios and the careers that continued and the careers built on the careers that continued, the morning in the Story conference room produced a sum that the arithmetic of a Pinnacle board meeting was not designed to calculate. It produced 34 more years of work in the discipline by the people Dorothy taught, and the people they taught. It produced films that got their edits back because continuity notes arrived in time. It produced a body of professional practice living in the work of people who never knew the name of the man who carried a box to the East parking lot on a March morning in 1961. Dorothy Havers's continuity binders from her final 3 pictures are in the collection of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Library in Hollywood. 12 binders from her career, in total, acquired over the years through the Academy's documentation program. The notation in the binders is her handwriting, compressed and precise. Shot numbers and costume details and dialogue variations and camera angle references in the system she built across 34 years in a south-facing office. Any working script supervisor can pick up one of those binders and read it as a functioning document, which is the highest form of professional legacy available in the discipline, which is to say it is a form of permanence that has nothing to do with credit. The binders are in the Margaret Herrick Library on La Cienega Boulevard. If you are in Los Angeles and you hold a research credential, you can request them. They are labeled by picture title and year, 12 of them, on a shelf in the manuscript and archive collection. The pencil marks are still legible, the compression is still exact. Some of you already know the name of someone who was told to stay in their lane at the precise moment they were in the right lane and needed someone to say so out loud. This story belongs to them. John Wayne never told anyone about the Story conference room, or the box, or the 4 words, or the 3-picture deal he moved in the same week. Not in any interview in the years that followed when people asked him about the business of Hollywood. And the people who made pictures work beneath the visible line of credit. Not in any statement about the institutional knowledge of the craft, or what it cost when that knowledge was discarded for a modernization theory. Not in any letter that has been found. Phil Cortez told his daughter in 1988, 27 years after the fact, because she asked him directly about the worst meeting he had ever sat through, and he told her the truth. Aldous Crane put 3 sentences about it in a memoir he never finished, and that his estate has not published. That is the complete documentary record. What a man does when he is told to stay in his lane is determined by whether the lane has any legitimate claim on him. Wayne was in the 3rd chair on the left side of that table to discuss his pictures. The pictures were his. The lane was not. He said 4 words at the volume of an ordinary observation, stood up from the correct chair, and went to the door where the wrong thing was happening, and he picked up the box, and he left. Greer's career ended because of what the 4 words meant, which is that the man saying them had decided, in the 2 seconds he spent looking at the head of the table, that this was the situation for which he was willing to use everything he had built in 30 years. Not a negotiating position. Not a threat requiring a response, a statement of what had already been decided, set at the volume the situation deserved, which was the volume of a man who has nothing left to prove and knows it. Dot Havers worked 8 more years. The pictures got made. Carol Reyes got 28 years. The binders are on the shelf. Subscribe if this story deserves to be told. There are more of them, and every one of them does. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.